Mike, you've owned Four Color Fantasies for 30 years, 2017 being your 30th anniversary, and you've been reading comics for even longer. You wanted to share, and we wanted to hear, why you love comics. This is hopefully the beginning of a multiple-part series throughout the year. So let's begin. Mike, what do you love about comics?
Okay, well, this is the first of our series, so why don't I start with First Comics? I mean, that makes sense. First Comics is a company that started in the early 80s, around 1983, ran through the 90s. They're responsible for tons and tons of great comics. And the great thing is, they're all cheap comics, too. You've got artists like Frank Brunner, best known for his work, his beautiful work on Doctor Strange's in the 70s, early Howard the Duck appearances, and then he disappeared from comics, except he didn't. He went over to this new company first and was drawing this book called Warp. What the hell is Warp? Oh, Warp is a science fiction play that was produced in Chicago that was then adapted into comics, and then the story continued on. That's a pretty bizarre start. That's where First Comics got its start. It was all these people in Chicago, some of whom had worked in comics before in New York and had moved, and all these theater people that loved comics. Second book they were doing, E-Man. That was a book that originally came out from Charlton Comics. These two creators, Nick Cudi and Joe Staton. And they wanted to do their own superhero, and they wanted something lighthearted. Well, they created the character years ago, and then bring him back in First Comics. From there, First went on to start all sorts of original series and pick up series from other companies that lasted just a couple of months. Little things. Mike Grell, one of my favorite artists, best known for his work on Green Lantern and Green Arrow. Green Arrow, he did a huge run for DC. Warlord, which he also did for DC. Oh, he also did two books that were creator-owned. One of them, Jon Sable Freelance, started at First. It's the story of a guy who was a game warden in Africa. His wife gets killed. He leaves Africa and comes over to America to be a bounty hunter. That's where the freelance comes in. Oh, by the way, let's make things a little more interesting. He also writes a novel about his experiences in Africa to get that published. And part of it does, he used to tell stories to his children who were also killed. Stories about the leprechauns that lived under a tree in Central Park. His novel, Shadows over Eden, never got published. But the publisher liked those parts. So he becomes a wildly successful children's book author under the pen name of B.B. Flem. And you've got this guy who is a hard-bitten mercenary, killer for hire, if the cause is right, who is also secretly moonlighting as one of the most popular children's authors of all time, writing cute stories about the leprechauns. That's Jon Sable Freelance. They also did another book by Grell, Star Slayer. That actually started with Pacific Comics. Pacific Comics folded 6 issues into Star Slayer. So then First Comics picked it up and continued on. Grell was already working full-time on Jon Sable Freelance when that happened, so he couldn't continue it. So they got a local writer, theater guy, a guy named John Ostrander, one of my favorite writers of all time, to take over. And they got this guy that lived in West Virginia at the time, and then later moved to Pennsylvania, unknown in the comic industry, named Tim Truman, to illustrate. And they started on Star Slayer. Star Slayer is simple. It's another science fiction book. It's the story of a Celtic warrior who gets grabbed and brought into the far future to save the universe, to save humanity from destruction at the hands of an alien race. You've seen that sense in things like Exo Manowar and the like, where a time-displaced warrior shows up to save the future. This was the first time that I saw it. They also did Ostrander and Truman, they liked the way they worked together, so they started a backup. That backup was Grimjack, which is my all-time favorite comic. Grimjack was more of a fantasy than a science fiction book, but it did include elements of fantasy, satire, political commentary, horror, you name it's in there. Grimjack's the story of this mercenary, John Gaunt. He's in his 40s. The average lifespan of a mercenary in the city he's in, Cynosure, is 36. So he's well over the hill. He should be dead by now, but he's still going strong. The city itself is one of the major characters in the book. Cynosure is also the cement that holds the first universe together. It's the city where every dimension meets. Magic works here, science works there, a sword works everywhere. So you've got John Gaunt, who fights demons, who travels to outer space, who travels to an Old West area, fights giant killer bunnies. His lover is a ghost. He dies and comes back. And all of it seems realistic. It's the way you meet people. The first issue of Grimjack, or the first appearance of Grimjack in the back of Star Slayer, this guy has a past and a history. And you don't know it. And they're not going to tell it to you. You learn it the same way you learn anyone else's history. A bit at a time. You know, Steve, you started working for me. Before that, you were going to school. Over the years, I've learned little bits and pieces about you. Mm-hmm. And you've learned the same about me. That's the way John Gaunt is. Mm-hmm. And all the characters in Grimjack. They all have full backstories, and you learn about them the way you learn about people. You'll hear more about Ostrander later in this series, I'm sure. But Grimjack, phenomenal. Other things that First did. They did tend to skew a little bit more science fiction-y. Things like Nexus, which was about by Steve Barron, or Mike Barron and Steve Rude. My apologies, Mike. That's about a serial killer who dreams of other serial killers. He's been given great power by this alien and horrible dreams. He dreams of serial killers from the viewpoints of their victims. And these dreams will not stop until he hunts down the serial killer and kills them to avenge their victims. But he's not looking at, a Jack the Ripper serial killer. He's looking at a Stalin, a Hitler, a Pot Pal, who has helped commit genocide. How's that for a concept? Now, Mike Barron also did another series for them called Badger. That's a lot more down to earth. That's about a Vietnam vet, Norbert Sykes. And Norbert has gone insane because of what he's dealt with, and he's got split personalities. One of them is a little girl, Emily. Another is the Badger, a heroic avenger of all environmental things. You've got other great things. I could go on for hours talking about them. Howard Chaykin doing American Flag. That's just fantastic. It's Howard Chaykin at his purest, his finest, while he's at the peak of his creative abilities. Jim Starlin, creator of Thanos, recreator of Captain Marvel and Warlock for Marvel, the creator of the cosmic epic that you see in Guardians of the Galaxy, that you're going to see in the Avengers Infinity Gauntlet, that's all Jim Starlin. He also created a character named Dreadstar and another great cosmic epic, which started at Epic Comics. When he got tired of what Marvel was doing, he brought it over to First and continued it. Beautiful, beautiful stuff. All of this stuff, unknown, cheap, but great comics. Whisper, which included early work by a guy named Norm Brayfogle, who later became known for Batman. That's a Ninja series. Dynamo Joe, an American series about a giant mecha. And on and on and on. 10 years of great stuff that no one knows about anymore. That's one of the things that I love about comics.
Well, thank you, Mike, and we'll pick it up next time with our next video, and we'll see you then.
We'll see you then.